So for the wood, it really helps have a good base coat. There's two ways you can do this. You can actually do it one way by having a light base coat, adding darker to it, which I recommend. So I would start with a light base coat. That would be raw sienna, yellow ochre, well, raw sienna and yellow ochre, I should say. And then I'll add a little bit of white to it so you can kind of see it. Here's the little raw sienna, white, yellow ochre. And I'll redo this section right here so you can kind of see it. So anyways, with this, I have a torn sponge. If you don't like the way the wood grain looks, you probably need to re-rip it. So this is kind of a nice little edge to it. And I'll go ahead and put the paint on. So this is, normally you guys always want to have like a variety of brush strokes. But this, hold on one second. So when you're doing this though, I recommend like starting off light and then singular brush strokes, back and forth, sort of like you're just sort of like painting a, like literally a floor. So mopping the paint on, one color, light, one direction. Normally it's a taboo thing going one direction, but when you're doing wood, this is like a perfect thing to do. Going back and forth. I'll use a sponge here in a second. Clean it up a little bit. Okay. One color, pretty much. You can change it a little bit. Like I'll add a little bit of burnt umber to it. And the streaks will make it look like wood already. So a little streak really helps. And come in here a little bit more of the browns. Yellow, ochre, and white. So I am changing color. So then watch this. I'm gonna take a little burnt umber in here again, streak it in there. So the streaks of the brush will make it look like wood grain already. Okay, so then if I had a hairdryer, I'd dry this dang thing. I'm gonna get that set up next time. All right, so technically you need to wait for this to dry, but anyways, I'm gonna take the sponge, the base coat there, looking halfway decent. I'll move it over a little bit so you can see it better. All right, all one color pretty much. Some variety, but not tons. Then we'll take a little bit of the burnt umber right here. You want to wait for this to dry 100% though, normally. I'll do a little bit of black into the burnt umber. So black, burnt umber, and I won't even try to mix it that well. So here'd be some black streaks, some dark brown, a little bit of a mix. All right. Then I'll come around here. I'll dip the sponge right into the paint. Dip it in there so it's nice and gooey. When I put this on there, I can like turn it different directions, the sponge. So I'll start here, then I'll drag it. I'll create the illusion of like wood grain pretty quick. And then to get like the little character into the wood so you don't have it all perfect, I'll take this. And once again, you guys, I really recommend watching this because it's good for interiors. You'll see how fast it is. So I come in here, drag it, and I'll move it a little bit. I'll jiggle it. That'll make it look like wood grain. Then I'll fade it out. So to fade it, I'll take this clean sponge, drag it out a little more. All right, now I'll dip it back in the black paint, black and brown. And then I'll let it barely put any pressure on it. So if you press too hard, it'll be smooth. So what you want is to see the wood grain. To see the wood grain, if you just barely put any pressure on there, it really shows that up. And I'll make sure it's all even on that thing. Drag it across. Wiggle it just a little bit. And let it fade. I'll dip it again. This time I'll like put more of an angle instead of like the full width. I'll come in here, drag it down, then I'll turn it a little bit. Here's like where I do a little dip. I'll continue that dip so the wood grain continues. And then I'll drag the sponge through again. So that way the dark brown and the black illusion of wood grain just because of the torn sponge. Like I said, if you don't like the way the wood grain's looking, I would recommend re-ripping the sponge. This technically could be like pretty wet when you put it on, the paint. So I'll go in here again. This is really dark here. I'll lighten it up a little bit. And drag it through. And get lighter and lighter. So I'll go darker over here. So if I want it darker on this side, I'll start on this side. Let it kind of blend off the sponge. Pull and drag. I have this like dark board right here, which I'll leave. Drag this down as well. Alright, so far, I have a good base. I got my generic wood grain, but there's no real character to it yet. So if I zoom in a little more, you can kind of see like the different patterns. Torn sponge has that illusion of wood grain, and then right here, it stops kind of abruptly. So what I'll do is I'll take a cleaner, rinse out the sponge a little bit. Rinse out the sponge, drag this down a little bit, fade this section out, let it kind of drift into the other style, and dragging it down. Alright, so then you should really let this layer dry as well before we do any more lines. Okay, so now that part's kind of done. Technically, for some floors, you can almost leave it just like that. So after your light base coat, it's actually really fast to do wood. Once again, I'll show you up close here, where you can see the different patterns, lines in there, starting with a light base coat, and dark for the wood grain. Okay, so now I'm gonna go to my round brush. Ooh, that's a good one. All right, and once again, this should be dry first. Should be doing it when it's wet. That's okay. All right, I'm gonna draw out some lines. And don't draw out all the lines to the boards. I'll put a little ruler on this thing. Make sure it's straight. 1 point perspective is a little easier. So now I have a guideline there. I'll break this up a little bit. I'll do another one here, but watch this. So I'll go here, I'll do a little bit here, and I'll skip all the way down here. There we go. All right, so I skipped a little bit. You can see the boards a little bit, but they're not really detailed. If you do details, you're gonna expect to see like all of them over the whole thing. As they get lower, closer to the viewer, they can get a little bit darker and a little bit thicker too for the lines. Okay, so that's it for that part. This is phase number 3. So we got the light base coat, and we got the pencil drawings for the wood grain, or the planks of the wood. Now I'll come in with the black and burnt umber, melt the kitten, so you can get like a nice clean edge on that thing. I'll go over the pencil here, drag it down like almost nothing. I'll squeeze down a little more, and have it fade again. So it's just like a little variety of thickness. You don't want it to look like a coloring book, so. Then I'll let that fade again. Here's another line over here. I'll start off dark, really thick here, then I'll like fade it, almost nothing again. All right, I'll do the same thing on this side. And the boards, you don't want them like so you're trying to show every single board. It's like this one, I'll just do 2 right there and that's it. I'll swing up here. These need to be really skinny because you're going further back. And back here, you won't even see anything. It'll be really simple. Maybe just indicate like a really skinny line every once in a while, but don't really worry about it. Okay. like the wood too. If you're doing a fence or something like that, it's really handy to be able to use a skill. It's kind of nice to be able to add wood to things. So if you have like a floor or something like that, I'm wondering like, what do I do? Do I do carpet? Whatever else. I'd always recommend wood because wood tends to look way more realistic than carpet. Carpet's kind of hard to do. Well, it's not hard to do, but it's nothing's really too hard. It's like a different technique though. You have to use sponges and what have you. Okay, then a light source, if it's coming from the window up here, down here, then what I do is I put the highlight on the side away from the light source. So I'll make a tint of it, white or raw sienna. Make sure I have contrast in there. And then, wipe off my hands here. All right, so then watch this. Here, skinny little line, get fatter right here, and then I'll let it fade to nothing. I'll do the same thing here. And then every once in a while do it. Don't outline the whole thing though, just like little hints of where it is. I'll go a little more white down here on this side. Okay, so that's layer number, whatever phase it's on. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this that I have already. I'm going to go back into it. Now I'll make some wood grain. So the sponge creates like an overall look of wood. Then you go back in with the darker colors. Get your clean sponge ready. It's pretty clean. Then I'll do some outlines of real wood grain. So come in here. I'll go like darker and bend it around a little bit, like a knot or something that's in there. Then you take your sponge and drag it through the paint. I'll smooth it out so it looks like more like wood grain rather than a brush stroke. Swings around here. Definitely get reference for the wood grain. I'll exaggerate that a little more. Like right here, for instance. Press down harder. Expand it a little bit. And take a sponge, drag it right through. I'll put a little knot right here. Watch this, here it goes. Little tiny knot right in the middle of the board. I did that by making it darker and lighter, skinnier and fatter. And here, have it go around the knot. Repeat that process over here as well. And when you're doing wood grain, yeah, the key is to follow reference, but all the compression rings, so you can't have them all like run into each other. So like here, if this bends up, the next piece of wood grain has to bend as well. I'll take a sponge, drag it through, soften it a little bit, and do the same thing on this side. You don't need to do this for all the wood. If you just do like a few of them, it's like trees. When you do a tree, you don't do every single leaf. Same thing with wood grain. This is like kind of simple right here. So because it's simple, I'll go back into the really simple areas and I'll add some more grain to it. All right, sponge and drag. All right, same thing here. Skinny lines. And I'll take a little more water. So this is pretty thin paint, so it's like a glaze almost. Go all the way across here. Take sponge, because it's further away, I'll drag it out more. Try to make it disappear, so it's really subtle. More dynamic wood grain is going to be up here in the front. So like right here, for instance. And drag through the sponge. And that's the technique. So it's like I would skip around too. So skip around when you're doing the wood grain so you don't get surprised. Like, oh man, I thought it was going to look a lot different. Do one board here, then skip up here, do this one. So you can see how it's coming along. Yeah, this works great for like sides of buildings, barns, old buildings, wood floors, just about anything. Okay, now I have some of this done. So now when I got this base coat, I'll zoom in again. I can see it better. All right, starting to look like wood. It's a little darker than I would like, but that's okay. All right, next thing, take a roller again. I got where your horizon is, so my horizon's up here somewhere. This is 1 point perspective, so in 1 point perspective, your vanishing point is on the horizon and about midway up the canvas. So you don't want to go like all the way to the right or left unless it's 2 point perspective. So I'll figure out my horizon. It's right about here, I'd say. Do a little line. There's my horror. Vanishing point right here. Okay. Then I'll add some slats to the board going another direction. So here, division the board right there. I'll do another one right about here somewhere. Just a few of them. You don't need to do too many of them. And then this one as well. Maybe this back one. All right, so now I have a few divisions of the board. So now I'll go back in. I'll add the lines. I'll go back in with my magical brush, which is in pretty good shape still. Nice. And here I'll go like wider chunk. And these are like little character marks you can add to your wood. So now I have like a little division where you can see the boards join. Corona. Okay, now I'll rinse out the brush. Add a tint to that, a little tint to the color. And on the opposite where the light source is, well, a little bit of a highlight on the other side of it. Not all the way across. Just a titch. Use my finger to kind of tap it out there a little bit. And then that is wood grain, wood floor. All right.